There was a story out yesterday, and maybe I'll get to this in more detail if we get a chance in the final hour of the program. It's not my top thing, but I wanted to mention it that the government now employs more people than manufacturers, may even be just the federal government, and to the tune of nearly 10 million. I'll have to give you an exact number. It's 9.77 million, I believe, which for liberals listening, just to let you know, that's pretty close to 10 million, just in case you needed a little help with the numbers there. So we'll get to that if we get an opportunity in the next few minutes. It's just that I've got to mention a couple of quick things because during the news break before Steve Millington left the building, he was chatting with me about. Well, we brought up the subject of Evan McMullin, whose campaign for a couple of weeks seemed to be like a rocket going through space over both Utah and Idaho, and maybe even parts of Wyoming. And then all of a sudden, McMullin dropped off the map. And you're seeing that too as well with Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, who are the other two major presidential contenders. I say major presidential contenders this year. That's not to disparage some of the other candidates who just don't have any money or get much publicity. Some of those parties, with the crisis we've had in this country that's been brewing for a while, could actually see some growth in their strength. And we could, who knows, by 2020, we could have five viable political parties on the national level. Maybe not 2020, but sometime in the next decade. It's just that McMullin was trying to appeal to a lot of voters out there, not just LDS in this area, but as well as just Christians who have, I think, across the board, who feel that Donald Trump is not a very good representative for this country, for its image, because of his past and some of the things he has said. And three marriages, you name it. There's a lot of things there that people have criticized. This morning, I came across a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. One is from Richard A. Baer Jr., writing in the Washington Times. And the Times remains, even though there are now several conservative alternatives being published in Washington, the Times really remains the mouthpiece for American conservatism in the nation's capital. He's a professor emeritus. That means they retired him of environmental ethics and policy at Cornell University. He says, I am quite clear that Donald Trump is no 21st century St. Francis of Assisi or Mother Teresa. But remembering that Jesus consorted with tax collectors and sinners, he says, my advice for Christians on November 8th is do not try to be more pious than Jesus. Moses, he writes, was a murderer. David, an adulterer and a murderer. Rahab, who saved the lives of Joshua's two spies, a prostitute. Paul, a persecutor of the nascent Christian church. So he goes along through all the details on a lot of the people we now think of as biblical heroes, and you realize they were very flawed people. And he said, so when you sit here and say Donald Trump is a flawed character, aren't we all? Uh, does the fact Donald Trump's been married three times, that he's made certain comments about women in the past, if you've only made one of those in your life and you've been married, let's say, just two times, does that mean that God likes you better than he likes Donald Trump, who's been married three times? That's a point I think we have to take into account. And then over at the Christian Post, Dr. Richard Land, who is a powerful leader among Southern Baptists and the like, and respected across the line, I think, in the evangelical community as a whole in this country, says he got a letter from a colleague who is a political conservative and a Roman Catholic. And he said, Richard, why is it that such a high percentage of the evangelical never-Trumpers are Calvinists? No, the guy's not being accusatory. He's just curious, and he'd like to know. Just a quick note, Donald Trump apparently on his way to cast his ballot this morning, where he has just completed it. You can see all of the the large SUVs and the strobe lights as this takes place this morning. Dr. Land writes, if you believe, as many Calvinists do, that everything has already been decreed and preordained by God, then it is certainly a more readily available option to believe that your decision not to choose a lesser evil over a greater evil, but to withdraw altogether and choose neither, has itself always been preordained. Now I'm going to jump right down to the bottom, last couple of paragraphs. He writes, when a decision gets really tough, albeit to the point of challenging your core beliefs about how to participate in democracy, it is extremely tempting to use a convenient doctrinal nuance to take the easy way out. Theology, politics, and the nature of fallen man are a lot more complex than that. And he says, for a quick tutorial on Calvinism, keep reading. And then he provided a website that people could go and they could check. So he's essentially saying the same thing. We've all got our flaws, and you've got to make a decision on who you think is going to be best for this country. And maybe you still think it is Evan McMullen, but I think a lot of people out there are saying, I really liked him, or I really liked Gary Johnson, and some people said they liked Jill Stein. But they ended up settling on either Trump or Clinton because they realized that perhaps this was not going to be the year that any of those other people would be president. And they had to look at the situation with Clinton or Trump and just weigh those two alternatives, who they thought would be for the better in this country, better or worse, over the next 4 years. And so I think this is what we're looking at. Also, Donald Trump speaks to people, I think, especially here in the Magic Valley on the local level. Some comments he made last night while giving some of his closing arguments. Take a listen for a moment. And it has been a topic that has been raging here on the local level as well.
Her plan will import generations of terrorism, extremism, and radicalism into your schools and throughout your communities. When I'm elected president, we will suspend the Syrian refugee program, and we will keep radical Islamic terrorists the hell out of our country.
A lot of people out there would agree with Donald Trump, and they're not all racists or bigots. They just simply believe that for the time being, until we can sort this mess out, this is a good idea. And the Democrats simply say, no, 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 we know best, and this is what we're going to do. Okay, step back for a moment. If you're a Hillary supporter, but yet you just agree with what Trump said, or you believe we need a pause in bringing these people here from Syria, how can you still vote for Hillary Clinton? If you believe that these people are a threat to the USA, and this is the thing, a guy in Florida this morning told Fox News, I heard it in one of the newscasts, that he says, I just think Donald Trump's too weird. I was supporting him, but gee, I don't know. Well, wait a minute. What are your interests? And so what are you ultimately voting for when you go and you pull the lever for someone like her? Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. It's 914, telephone number 736-0300, 736-0300. We're up to 41. Temperatures over the next couple of days in the mid-60s. And you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi. I was a never Trumper, but I did vote for Trump. Because the more he talked about corruption, the more he appealed to me.
I think a lot of people, in your situation too, for instance, even if they didn't like him, when he started talking about how the media was treating him, and then we started hearing about Donna Brazile and other people at CNN cross-tabling with the Clinton campaign, and then newspaper columnists from across the country also using the DNC as a resource for their research, all of a sudden, even if you didn't like Trump, you realized the game was really, they were trying to, to build a case against him, and it underscores that point we've been making for years, and that is this, that a Republican not only has to campaign against the other side, but against the media as well. And here's a question. Did that help influence your decision too?
I already knew that Clinton was corrupt. I knew that there was problems there all across the board, which is why I will never vote for them. But until Trump started addressing whether he will try to drain the swamp, in his own words, I really didn't feel compelled to vote for him, but that kind of turned the tables for me.
I think that you are not alone today, and I thank you much for the telephone call. I'll add a couple of things to that if I could. I was at the beginning, as you know. Well, during the primary season, I voted for Ted Cruz because he was about the last man standing. Prior to that, I had an affinity either for Rand Paul or Bobby Jindal or Rick Perry. And I would have loved to have had any one of those four. Actually, there were a lot of people on that ticket. Jim Gilmore, who finished way in the back of the pack, was a super guy. Would have been a great candidate, too, as well, compared to what we have. And yet, when you see what's happened to Trump when it comes to the media treatment of him, I believe in fair play. And when someone is beating on someone, even though I didn't support the guy wholeheartedly in the beginning, and I see media doing this is a threat to this republic, folks, more so than Donald Trump is. Because these are the people who are trying to shape your public opinion. And if they can do it with this case, what are they going to try to tell you is right and wrong next? You're on the air with Bill Colley at 9:16 on Top Story. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. I think the thing that's most concerning of today in the voting is the very likelihood of voter fraud. And I think Trump is absolutely correct in not going to concede until the vote is verified. But, Romney won every state where there's photo ID. He lost every state that there's not. And until we get back to having photo ID for elections and actually a paper ballot of some sort, um, there's too many ways to steal the election. So even however it comes out, it's real likelihood in some of these key battleground states there's going to be some massive voter fraud. The other thing about Ted Cruz, I was a supporter of Ted Cruz as well. I've called twice to his office in Washington, D.C., begging them basically to have him come out and endorse Trump or at least support him. But he's too prideful. I will not support Ted Cruz for anything. He's got to swallow his pride and think of the country instead of just his own personal situation. I realize Trump beat up on him, his family, but he's not looking at the long haul. And I really was disappointed, and I won't support him for anything, because if he can't support the candidate, regardless of Trump's faults, I guess you'd say, Bill, but it's really sad that Christians are going to sit home and let Hillary perhaps get elected, and this country is really going to go down the hill. Hillary will be Obama on steroids as far as destroying this country, and that's really sad.
I would agree with that, and I thank you for the call. I give Cruz some credit, though. He has been campaigning for U.S. Senate candidates, most of whom claim they never liked him. Now they desperately need him in some states. So it's funny how politics works in that sense. Gee, we don't like Ted, but the people like him, so I'll have him come campaign with me, and they'll think they're voting for him. I just got a quick note here. This is from Christy Zitto, who is she's going to have win about 85% of the vote in her district today, which stretches from Elmore County all the way down to sections of Twin Falls County. And she's writing about this discussion. She says, she said, God doesn't always choose the most qualified. He qualifies who is chosen. Wonderful message to keep in mind on a day like today. I'll try and take more of your telephone calls in just a few minutes. I have a short break. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 40, and we have another 40 minutes of the program still ahead. Tomorrow morning, of course, we'll have a rundown on all of the results, and you can catch some of our coverage tonight. I'll get to my next caller in just a moment, but you can catch our rundown, our coverage, all of that. It's almost seamless, but we'll be here tonight. What we'll be talking about is local races. On the other hand, we'll be carrying mostly Fox. It's broadcast on the national level, but we'll be breaking in periodically, and as I mentioned before, U.S. Senator Jim Risch joining us. We may have some folks on from the local level, too, as well, from some of their victory parties. Tomorrow morning as well, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about how to deal with an election hangover. One of the experts from Tripp Family Medicine is going to be joining us in studio. We do this every Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Tripp Family Medicine still looking for new patients, and they can often see you on the very same day. You call up and say, hey, I've got an issue. They'll try to get you in by the afternoon. And they're located, the office located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office in Twin Falls. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. 24 minutes after 9, it's 42. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Caller, you're up next.
Thank you. In regards to Ted Cruz, I read or heard somewhere that he did come out and tell everybody he was voting for Donald Trump and that he was actually going to be going on the campaign trail with Vice President nominee Pence. So I thought, well, it was real late, like about there was only like a week left, but I did hear this or read it. So I thought, yay. He's helped himself a little bit here with the rest of the populace. Anyway, thank you, Bill.
Hey, thank you. He was in Missouri campaigning with Roy Blunt. Roy Blunt's office did a favor for me one time years ago when he was the deputy. Well, he was the what do you call it? The whip or he was he got the votes together on the floor, I believe, at the time for the Republicans, and they did me a favor when I was in D.C. one time. He's a super guy. He's running for reelection in a very tight race in Missouri, and Ted Cruz was there the other day campaigning for him. We have another caller with us. You're up next, and you're on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, guys. It's a great day to be an American, isn't it?
Ah, it's a wonderful day.
Yes, sir. And that we've got one of our greatest rights to vote today. And I've got to say, I wished, where's all the Republican congressmen and senators? I know they're scared to death of what's going on. They got their head buried in the sand. But either way, this election turns out, we just need to warn them, pack your bag, because you're playing games. We're coming for you. And let's just hope for the best. I got a great feeling about this, guys. And everybody I talk to has got the same thing. I think this voter turnout's going to be just tremendous. So thanks, guys, for everything.
Hey, thank you. I'm hopeful, I'll put it that way, about today, and I don't necessarily think that the polls can measure enthusiasm to the degree that they claim, some of the pollsters claim, that is. Pat Buchanan made a good point today in his column. He has a syndicated column. He said that if even if Trump loses, that his stamp of what he's done is going to stay with us for a long time. He said if the Republican establishment thinks they're going to come in and prop up the Bush dynasty like the Russians tried to prop up the Romanovs after the revolution, said it's not going to work. He said there's simply no room to do that. And I tend to feel he's spot on when he says something like that. Krauthammer said it last night on TV. He's not a Trump fan, but he said even if Trump loses, this is Donald Trump's party for a very long time. And Republicans, I think, when you saw Mike Crapo reverse himself on his, he backed off being behind Trump, then he got back on the Trump bandwagon because he realized, you know what, this is a movement, and I've got to be with that movement if I plan to survive in the long run politically. You're on the air. We've got about a minute and a half before the break. Go ahead.
I think it's actually wise for Ted to not actually come out and flat out endorse him, for the same reason that it's wise to not early vote with somebody as volatile as Trump. Because if things go south and Trump ends up being a terrible president, his name is permanently attached to Trump's name.
Well, I think that...
And if Trump were to go off the deep end right after I did my early voting, I can't change my vote. So it's the same kind of situation. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I will vote for Ted Cruz for anything because he's the only one that had any balls to stand up against this idiot that we have in the White House right now.
Thank you for the call. Ted Cruz is also a very shrewd politician. And the caller brings up a point. Cruz was able to stand back and simply, assess the situation. He's, again, campaigning for other U.S. senators who supposedly don't like him. He's going to save their bacon in some cases, pull it out of the fire. And then, on the other hand, even though he came in late to the Trump game, he looks like a team player now. But you're right. He's not going to be overly associated with Trump, and he maintains some independence. I think that Ted Cruz is going to be one of those other powerful political forces in this country for a very, very long time. I think there's a bright future ahead with people like Cruz, Jindal. I'm sorry to see Rick Perry kind of fade from the political scene. If he had been the nominee in 2012, we'd be talking about reelecting him today. It's unfortunate it didn't turn out that way. There is a strong message, though, for these political elites in both parties, and I think that Trump has cleared the path, that the political correctness that had dominated politics for the last few decades, which didn't exist, by the way, in the early days of this republic for a very long time, that the public doesn't want to hear all that pablum. They want truth talkers. And to the Republicans, again, who think they're going to come in and reimpose the control grid, it's not going to work on the national or the local level. 9:30. We've got more on this subject coming up. It's 42. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on KLIX.